It's a super rainy day outside, so if the rain comes through into the recording, I hope it just sounds peaceful. Hello, my name is Kobe McCool, and in this video we're talking about a really glamorous topic, which is storage. All jokes aside, having a proper storage management system is probably one of the most important things you can do as a producer or creator beyond creating things. It's not much good being able to create an amazing idea if it's not safe and you then lose that idea. So I'm going to talk you through everything I've learned about storage management, all the different options from the most cheap and most simple all the way up to the most complex and professional. Though I'll give as much info as I can, it's certainly not a complete guide to storage, so anything you've learned and you'd like to share, just post it down below. And of course, if you find this video valuable, you know what to do. In this video, I'm just going to talk about all the different options that there may be and how you might use them, and I'm going to make a secondary video talking in more detail about my specific setup, what devices and systems I use, and how I organize everything from file management to backups. Before we look into all the tech, it's important to understand why you need it in the first place. The first reason seems obvious and it can't be overstated, is you just want to make sure your work is safe. Studio equipment like microphones, headphones, speakers, these kinds of things can be replaced, but if you lose files, you've lost time, money, and irreplaceable memories and ideas. If you're new to the world of storage, you might be thinking, is it really that important? But losing data is something that can happen all the time. Storage drives do fail, and if you've been in the computer and storage world for a while, you will know from experience, it's not a question of if drives will fail and you might lose data, it's a question of when. This is a lesson I've learned the hard way 1 or 2 times. I've had drives fail on me and some work I just lost forever. That sinking feeling that you get in your heart and in your gut when you've just lost something that means a lot to you and you just can't recover it is just awful. So anything you can do to avoid that is 100% recommended. Not only that, having a good system is much more professional. You can access all your files much more quickly, share it with other people, artists, creatives. You can increase the performance of your computer so that projects load faster and run more smoothly. You're less likely to open up your software and have an error message going,
"Warning, files missing" or "files corrupted."
And even if you do, you'll have a backup that you can move on to. And as your system gets more complex, you can also access your files pretty much anywhere in the world and work on them as yourself or in a team of other people globally. And the benefits continue the more you look into it, if I haven't convinced you yet already. As a basic outline to understand the options in this video, you can have storage to work from and you can have storage to use as a backup. And you can cross those two together and use them as both if you need to. As a producer in the studio, it's usually ideal to have things like applications and programs on your C drive, that's the main drive that's in your computer or your laptop, all your sample packs and sound libraries on a separate drive, and all your projects and raw files on another drive. Then each of those drives you want to have backups of. Backups can be broken down into hot, warm, and cold storage, where hot is the files you're using today and regularly, and warm is the files that you might need soon, but you don't have to access them immediately. And cold storage is where you don't touch those files, you just simply back up to them and they are safe, usually off-site. The general rule of thumb with backups is having it in 3 places, including your live environment, and one of those places to be off-site, so that if something happens to where you've got the storage, you've also got that safe somewhere else. Now the different options, from the most simple all the way up to the best, most robust, most professional. The most bog standard, very basic, and definitely not recommended system, but actually something that's still quite common, is just literally having everything on the C drive of your computer, with no backups, no extra storage. If you don't know any better, this is definitely a mistake that you can make, and this was me a few years ago. There's so many problems that can occur when you run your system like this. For one, you have no backups. If that drive fails, you lose everything. 2, your computer is probably going to be running very slowly because there is literally only one stream or pathway that all of the information can go. Like a river or a tunnel, it only has so much of a capacity and you're asking everything to go through that one stream. If something happens to your device or it gets stolen or it gets broken, again, all of your files are gone. It's just not a good idea. If this is you, you definitely want to be upgrading as soon as you can. And yes, I'm talking to you. The next step up from this, and the most simple and usually the most cost-effective short term, is having cloud storage and backups. This can be to a program like Google Drive that I use, or OneDrive, Dropbox. There are a lot of different options. Certain sites like Google Drive have certain free plans, so if you only need a minimal amount of storage, you can just upload stuff to there straight away with no cost involved. But if you want to expand to more reasonable sizes, you end up paying a monthly or yearly subscription. Sites like Google Drive, OneDrive, and Dropbox, where you can actually upload, organize, and potentially work from those platforms, whereas you have other more backup-centered platforms like Backblaze, where it just does what it says on the box, backups. Here are the pros of cloud storage. They have a good selection of different packages depending on your storage needs, and you can always expand if you need to. The upfront cost is usually relatively cheap and minimal. You can set up automatic backups and sync with your other drives on your computer. The storage capacity is only limited by your budget. It's pretty much always safe from a hardware failure because it's being run and managed by the provider rather than you yourself, and you can access those files pretty much anywhere in the world with internet connection. The cons are, however, if you have a capped internet usage like I do, because we're out in the middle of nowhere in Scotland, so we don't have fiber optic yet, that would give us an unlimited amount of data usage. We're using the 4G from the phone mast, so we have about 500 gig of data that we can use each month. If I were backing up all of my files consistently, I would use that up very quickly and incur a lot of data charges. Or if you have really low internet speeds, then uploading and downloading all your files could probably take forever. Paying a subscription can be cheaper in the short term, but those costs can build up over time and you never actually physically own the storage. You're tied into that relationship with the provider more or less forever. The more storage that you need and expand into, the higher the cost is going to be. Finally, online services are not safe from hacking or data breach, where someone could access your files or just delete your files if they hacked your account. So you want to make sure you've got good passwords and you manage your data security. Backblaze is often spoke about as being the best and cheapest backup option. I don't personally use it because of the internet limitation that I have, but as soon as I do have unlimited internet, I think it's certainly something I would jump on. And I've heard if you lose all of your files and you need them to send you your files, they will physically send you a hard drive with all of your data so you can make the transfer and then send them the hard drive back. I should mention all of the things that I talk about, there will be links to down below so you can go and check them out for yourself. Now let's move on to physical storage. The pros of physical storage are you pay once and you own the storage. If the speeds of the drive are fast enough, it's much better to work from. You'd probably struggle to work from a cloud storage unless you had rapid internet speeds, whereas having the physical storage there, especially if it's got fast read and write speeds, you'll be able to work directly from. You can of course take that physical storage with you if it's portable. It can be great for creating multiple copies of or setting up your own redundancy. It's much harder for somebody to hack into a physical drive. Some of the cons of physical storage is that they do all generally have a life expectancy, maybe of 3 to 5 years, so you are going to have to plan in for replacing them. Generally, it's recommended to get at least 2 of whatever you decide to get so that you've got an option of a backup, which can mean that it's slightly more expensive upfront than using cloud storage. If you don't have a more complex physical storage setup, things like redundancy can start becoming a problem. Redundancy essentially being a contingency plan for when one of those physical drives fails. Wow, this rain is actually getting really heavy. Mother Nature having a good drink. Let's talk through a couple of different types of physical storage that you can have. The first and most common would be hard drives. You've probably seen or heard about them before. I won't go into the complex jargon explaining each of these devices. You can look into it a little bit yourself. This is an electromechanical storage device. It just uses a bunch of spinning disks and magnetic material to store and access all of your files. The pros of hard drives are they are cheaper and usually more affordable, so it's easier to get a larger amount of terabyte per pound. The speeds and reliability of them have been increasing as the technology has been improving, especially if you get a pro quality drive. It's definitely one of the cheapest ways to get a massive amount of personal storage. Some of the cons though, they are generally slower and bigger compared to something like an SSD, and they're usually noisier because they have the mechanical spinning disk that has to fire up when it's going to be reading and writing. This of course makes them slightly more vulnerable to damage as well, because it's more easy for that mechanical system to fail, especially if it's moved or not taken care of properly whilst it's in use. So you've got to be sure to take care of them well. Some of the brands that I would recommend and I have used so far are things like Western Digital and Seagate. And usually it's best to go for the highest quality that you can afford. The next option being SSDs, meaning solid state drive. This functions differently to a hard drive with a spinning disk. SSDs instead use semiconductor chips to send and receive data. This means generally that they can operate at much faster rates than hard drives. The actual physical drive itself is usually more robust because it doesn't have those mechanical parts moving. That generally means that they can operate almost silently, which obviously in a music studio is a really important thing. I currently am using the Samsung T7 Touch and have used the Lacie rugged SSD in the past. The speeds of my Samsung SSD can go up to 1000 megabytes per second or a gigabyte per second, which is amazing for working from directly, whether that's video editing, recording, or producing. Some of the cons of SSDs though are that they are much more expensive because they offer that higher performance. I had 2 of the Lacie rugged SSDs and both of them failed on me as well, and I'm not totally certain why that happened. Whilst they were working, they were tremendous, they were very fast and efficient, but it just goes to show that these disks can still fail. I thought this was just going to be a quick shower of rain, but it's like, it just keeps getting heavier. Anyway, both SSDs and HDDs can be internal or external, and there are a few pros and cons to either of those options. Internal drives, of course, being physically installed inside your computer or your laptop. The pros here can be that they are often faster and run more effectively with your computer and can often be cheaper than the external options. They're often likely to last longer because they have a direct link to your computer rather than having to use some sort of USB converter like a lot of the external ones have to. The cons, of course, being that they aren't portable, so if you want to take the files with you, you have to take your computer with you, or transfer the files onto the cloud or some external device. They can also be trickier to replace or install into a computer, especially if you're inexperienced or you're using a laptop where everything is built into the actual system and it's really tricky to open up and access. There, of course, come in the external drives, where the pros being they are portable. They can go wherever you can go. That also means that they can be used between different devices, so long as the device you're using has the right port. Two SSDs that I mentioned earlier both happened to be external ones. Some of the cons of using external drives is that they can be more expensive and they are often more likely to fail because you are moving them about and plugging them into different devices, which just increases the chance that they'll incur some damage. Although be aware, I've heard people mention they've had external drives fail and realized eventually that it's not the actual drive that's failed, it's just the adapter or the port for the USB cable to go into the computer that's failed, and if they replace that, suddenly you get all of your data back because the drive itself is still fine. I really hope this rain hasn't ruined the sound quality. Another option you actually have is taking an external drive like this and plugging it into a dock like I have here, and then you can plug that into your computer, and so then you've turned an internal drive into an external drive. The next progression on from there would be getting something called RAID, which currently stands for Redundant Array of Independent Disks, although it used to be Inexpensive Disks. I'm not quite sure why it changed. What this essentially is a number of drives that have been grouped together to work as a team, so that if one of those drives fails, the other ones step in and rewrite all of the data, so that your data is more protected from a drive failure. The pros of this, of course, being that your data is more reliable, and instead of having to replace everything when there's a drive failure, you just have to replace the disk that failed. The cons here being just that it is a much more expensive upfront cost, especially if you want to get a high quality RAID system, but definitely worth it long term if you can make the investment. Additionally, having a RAID setup is not necessarily a backup unless you've made it a backup. The rain has calmed down. Just having a RAID setup simply means that that storage device that is made up of the little drives is less likely to fail overall. Let's say you had 20 terabytes on one drive, or you had 4 5-terabyte drives. The 20 terabyte drive is really vulnerable because if it fails, the whole thing fails. Whereas with the 4 times 5 terabyte drives, if one of the drives fails, you can just take one out and put another 5 terabyte in, and you just do that indefinitely. And you can even have a setup where if 2 of the drives fail, you can replace those 2, but it depends on how you configure your RAID. All in all, it's a much more robust solution than just having one really big hard drive. It can of course be used as a backup if you've implemented it into your backup setup, but it's not a good idea to rely only on one RAID device. It's probably a good idea to treat a RAID system like it's one storage device, rather than thinking that it's multiple storage devices that things are backed up onto, because of course they can still fail or they could be stolen. The next storage device that it's great to have, or a feature within it, is NAS, which means Network Attached Storage. Simply put, it means the device has the ability to connect to a network so that the data on that device can be shared within that network or on the internet. This obviously widely increases the accessibility of the device because you don't have to physically be there to actually access the files off of the device. It's similar to what a cloud storage is, but of course it's your device, and very often the speeds that you can get off of a NAS will be much faster than they could be off of a cloud service. So you could actually work off of a NAS remotely, so long as you're either connected to the internet or connected to the network that the NAS is attached to. This means you have a center for your files, but you can share that with other devices of yours or other people who are working with you on a project. Obviously, the cons with things like RAID and NAS are generally that they are a bit more expensive, and also that there's a bit of a steep learning curve to try and understand how everything works, but it's something that you can just gradually learn more and more about, and it's definitely worth doing because it pays off. Now, the next best setup from there, which is something I am currently installing and getting to grips with in my own studio, is the combination of NAS and RAID. So you have storage that's attached to a network or a NAS, and within that storage system, you have multiple storage devices that's giving you the redundancy from the array of independent disks. Whew. It's a mouthful, but it's definitely an awesome thing to have in your setup. I've been looking into this for a while and I came across Synology's products and they seem to be offering the best for what I felt my needs were, so I reached out to them to see whether they had something that I could test out in the studio, and they very kindly sent me across this unit. I'm going to go into a lot more detail in the next video about how I'm actually using it in the studio setup and all the different array of options that it comes with. It's actually mind-blowing the number of options that this device has and just how much better it is than just one simple storage device. But here's a quick rundown of the pros. The device I have is the DS1621 Plus, DS standing for Diskstation, which has 6 different bays that I can put 6 separate drives into, but it also has ports on the back that I could connect to more NASs in the future if I needed to, so the storage expandability is pretty incredible. The maximum capacity of the different drives that could go into each of those bays is 16, so if I filled them all up to the top, I would have 6 times 16, which is 96 terabytes of data. Currently it functions at a 1 gigabit per second speed, but it's something I could expand to 10 gigabit per second, and Synology have devices that you can buy that already work at 10 gigabit per second. 10 gigabit per second. With this device you get all of the benefits of having a NAS and a RAID setup. You can access the data from anywhere within your studio setup, any room, on any device, but also anywhere in the world if you have an internet connection. You can set up all sorts of different backup options automatically or manually. You can have an extremely complex file management system where you've got different volumes, different pools. You can share the storage between your family members or other people working with you on projects, but you also have control of the security of those files, but also the access to those files. It has its own software, which essentially makes it another computer rather than just a storage device. And you could potentially install SSDs in each of those bays so that the speeds would be even more ridiculous. And of course, those are things I would like to expand into the future. There's multiple different RAID options that you have, especially with something like 6 bays. I'll go into that in the next video too, but I have the capacity to expand the size of the storage pools that I have if I put in 4 6 terabyte drives, which I have at the moment, but I decided I wanted to make those 12 terabyte drives in the future. I would have the ability to take them out and add in 12 terabyte drives instead, while still keeping all of the data. That would be set up with the RAID configuration I have, which is an SHR, but of course I'll go into that in more detail. Another thing that's worth mentioning within the software of this device is it has a health checker where it will actually tell you what the health status of each of the individual devices are, and it'll warn you beforehand if it's likely to fail. This is so handy considering that most other drives, you don't really know whether they're going to fail or not. And this actually already happened to me when I was setting it up. I plugged in the first 4 drives that I had and it told me that one of them had bad sectors, which recommended that I would replace it. Without using it inside the Synology, I would have had no idea that drive was likely to fail. It's basically just an awesome storage management device. I could use it to back up each of the separate drives that I would have for my samples, for my projects, for my C drive, and all of the information, applications and so on that I have stored on there. And the list of awesome features just goes on. The cons of having a drive like this are that obviously it's slightly more expensive up front, but the value that you get from what you pay for is definitely worth that. And Synology also have an array of different storage types, so you could get smaller scale devices that fit with your budget at the moment and expand into other options in the future. Because I'm currently using hard drives in the device, and the device itself has some fans to keep it cool, it does generate a little bit of noise, especially when it's working really hard. But the great thing about it being network attached is that you don't have to have it physically in the studio. You can put it anywhere that suits you. It could be down in the basement or in a separate room that can be as noisy as it needs to be. Of course, like I mentioned earlier, it's not a guaranteed backup unless you've actually got it integrated into a foolproof backup system with other devices. Of course, the next level nerdy setup system from there would be having a Synology NAS backed up to another Synology NAS, and that is of course something I would like to aim to do in the future, but we'll get there. That can make for an absolutely awesome bulletproof setup where you can access your files and work from them anywhere with anyone, however you like. And it's just exciting to know that that kind of thing is going to be possible, because ultimately the reason you're doing all of this stuff is so that all of these ideas and the creative projects that you're doing are safe, easy to access, and easy to use. One final one that I'll mention, just because it could be an option that suits your needs, is tape drives. These are a much more old school method that have a pretty significant upfront cost for the actual tape drive device itself, but the tapes themselves are usually inexpensive. I'm not very well experienced with tape drives. I can't speak directly to it, but I've heard that they're a good long-term option for data management. There you go. There's my extensive, but certainly not all-inclusive list of different options for storage management as a producer, and I really hope that all of these options give you a help. Check out all the links down below to the different products that I mentioned, and you can have an explore and find something that works for you. And of course, please do share down below any of the things that you've learned and discovered. The last thing I'll say is that if you do run into the unfortunate position where you've lost some of your data and you can't get it back, I really feel your pain. It's awful, but at the same time, it's not the end of the world. You can recover. You will likely make other, better, more exciting ideas. You just have to believe that you can, take a deep sigh, and move on. And then, of course, upgrade your backup and storage system. Thanks very much for watching this video. I know this was a slightly longer one, but I feel it's such an important topic. And I wanted to make this video because I would have loved this video to have existed when I was looking into all of this. So I really hope that it helps you out. Thanks for liking, subscribing, commenting, sharing, all of those wonderful things. I really look forward to sharing the next video with you, and you can click on one of those right now. But until then, of course, believe in yourself and you will be unstoppable. Bye.